2-ingredient dough is a recipe that I've been making from the start of my weight loss journey, and it's something that really just helps me to stay on track. It's quick and easy, just made with all-purpose flour, baking powder, and non-fat plain Greek yogurt. And today I've included a bunch of recipes of different ways that I use 2-ingredient dough. So if you enjoyed this video or find it helpful, please go ahead and give it a like and subscribe to my channel. I really appreciate it. And let's go ahead and get started with recipe number 1. Bagels are definitely one of the 2-ingredient dough recipes that I've made the most throughout my journey, and just with 2-ingredient dough in general. You're going to see me make this dough for every recipe in this video, but you'll see that sometimes I do it differently. I use different seasonings, different flour. However, I have always used the same yogurt, and that specifically is the Chobani non-fat plain Greek yogurt. But for this batch of bagels today, I used some onion salt, garlic powder, as well as some everything bagel seasoning I actually mixed into the dough. I'm going to sprinkle it on top as well, but I find that it just adds more flavor when you actually mix it in with the dough. I find it's easiest to just use my food scale to weigh out the different portions of the 2-ingredient dough after I make it. And all I do is put a bowl on my food scale and zero it out. Then I put the entire portion of the dough and see how many grams it is, and then I divide that by how many servings I want. And usually I do weigh out equal portions, but today I wanted some bigger bagels and smaller ones that were just different point options. So once I divided the portions, I just formed them into the shape of a bagel. Then I'm just adding some egg wash using a pastry brush, and then I top them with some more of that everything seasoning. You don't have to use the egg wash. Sometimes I'll just use some nonstick olive oil spray, but I find that the seasoning sticks better and it makes them just a little bit more toasted. Next up, we've got another recipe that I make the most using 2-ingredient dough, and that is pizza bakes. I start out by making the dough using 1 1/3 cup all-purpose flour, a teaspoon of baking powder, a cup of non-fat plain Greek yogurt. For the seasoning, I did onion, salt, and then a roasted garlic and herb seasoning. And I mix it all together just using my hands. I prefer to use food-safe gloves like this, and I can link them in the description below, the ones that I use. But I just find it's the easiest way to actually make the dough. And I actually made a double batch today, so I'm just laying out the extra dough as pitas that I'll use later in the week. But the dishes that I use are perfect for these. I got them from IKEA, and I can link them in the description. They are 8 by 6 by 2, and I like to par bake the crust first, so I just pop it in the oven at 400 for about 10 minutes. I just find that this helps to make it a little more doughy and helps the crust to get a little bit more brown faster without overdoing it with the toppings. I keep it really simple with the sauce, and I just use a can of tomato sauce from Trader Joe's that I add some seasoning to. And once the crusts have baked for 10 minutes, that's when I take them out of the oven and start to add the toppings. So I put a good amount of the sauce, which is actually just 0 points. I always try to include one veggie. Today I'm using onion and mushrooms, and then I've got some pepperoni and light mozzarella cheese. While those bake in the oven, I'm just quickly prepping a salad that we're going to have before, but I usually let them bake for another 20 minutes or so. I check them after 10 and rotate them just to make sure they're not getting overdone. And you really don't have to par bake the crust like I do. It's just what I've come to prefer now that I've been making them so much. But once the bottom of the crust is browned, that's usually when it's done. Okay, first of all, starting out this video, I just want to say how weird it is to see the carpet in the kitchen. Right when we moved into our house, it was carpeted in the kitchen, and that was one of our first projects we did. So we have hard floor in there now, but it is weird to see the carpet like it used to be. I kind of forgot that it was like that. But anyway, next up, we're making biscuits and gravy for breakfast. Today I'm making the biscuits normally with the regular amounts of Greek yogurt and flour, but sometimes I'll actually swap out some of the yogurt and add non-fat milk. I find that this just helps to make them a little bit fluffier, but I don't always do it. I weighed out the dough into equal portions to get 8 biscuits, making each one 2 points on WeightWatchers, and while I pop those in the oven to bake, I'm just making the gravy. I usually check them and flip them over after 10 minutes, and for the gravy, I'm just using some turkey sausage, flour, and then that low-fat milk that I was talking about before, which I should have really just used it for these biscuits because I did have some. I add a lot of pepper to my gravy and some other seasonings like garlic salt and onion powder, and it usually times out perfectly that the gravy is done right as the biscuits are finishing up in the oven. They end up taking about 15 to 20 minutes to bake. I'm honestly still getting used to my oven since we've moved, but it has kind of changed some of the times and temps that I bake things at. But once the biscuits have browned, I pop them out of the oven. I usually like to cut them in half, and then I top them with a good amount of the gravy. Up next is a recipe that I make all the time when we do an appetizer night, which I mentioned that's one of our favorite things to do for dinner. We used to order takeout food all the time to get appetizers, and it was much higher point, so it's been fun to find lightened up ways to do that at home, and this is one of those recipes. I start by making the normal 2-ingredient dough. I'm just using regular all-purpose flour today. I'm making 2-ingredient dough bagel dog bites, and I'm dividing the dough into 16 equal portions. This always works out perfectly because then I just use 4 sausages and cut them up into 4 equal pieces each. The sausages I'm using today are my favorite for this. It's the Johnsonville turkey cheddar dogs. They've also got some chicken dogs that are, I think, cheddar or jalapeno or something that we really like for this as well, but you could honestly use anything. So after I've cut the sausages up, I just kind of form the dough around them till they're pretty much tightly sealed. They always remind me of marshmallows the way that I shape them, but then I top them with a little bit of egg wash and then some everything bagel seasoning. This seasoning is definitely my favorite to use for these, but I've also done like garlic and herb or garlic parmesan. You can do whatever you prefer. I just like the everything seasoning with these. But once they're topped, I pop them in the 400-degree preheated oven and just bake them until they're fully golden. This next recipe is an example where I'm using a different flour, so today I've got 1 1/3 cup of whole wheat flour. I'm adding some garlic parmesan seasoning and garlic salt, and then 1 cup of non-fat plain Greek yogurt and a teaspoon of baking powder. Sometimes I'll do a half and half mix of whole wheat flour and all-purpose flour because it is a little bit more on the dry side with the whole wheat. Sometimes I even have to add some extra Greek yogurt like I just did. But I still just mix it together until it forms a dough. I use my food scale to weigh out 2 equal portions because today I'm making 2 pizzas. Usually when I make pizzas, I just end up dividing the batch in 2 because I find that I like to have a lot of crust for them. This makes it a 9-point portion of dough when you use the all-purpose flour, but when you use the whole wheat flour, it makes it 7 points. I do pop the crust in the oven to par bake for about 10 minutes while I get the rest of the ingredients prepped. So I've got some pulled chicken here that I'm just mixing with barbecue sauce. Also, that's just a calzone next to it. I made Trevor one with the extra dough that I had, so I'll have one of those later in this video to show you how I make it. But for the barbecue pizza, I'm adding some light mozzarella cheese and red onion. I've also been loving crunchy fried onions on things, so I just add 1 point. It's like a tablespoon worth, and it adds so much extra flavor to the pizza. Then I add a little drizzle of some barbecue sauce on top, and I'm just using the no sugar added Sweet Baby Ray's barbecue sauce today. Then I pop it back in the oven for about 10 or 15 minutes until it's all toasted up and the cheese is melted, and that's it. Okay, next we're making some taco calzones with salsa, and this time I'm making the 2-ingredient dough with a little bit of protein flour. I don't always have it on hand, but it is a nice option to add more protein to the dough, so I do 1 1/3 cup of that, and sometimes I have to add a little bit of extra Greek yogurt with this one. Then I also add some baking powder, taco seasoning, and a little bit of onion salt. This is going to be our meal, so I'm just dividing the dough into 2 portions, which are 9 points each. And I just try to work with them a little bit to soften them up and flatten them out to make them kind of like an oval shape. Then once I have it flattened out enough, I add a little bit of reduced fat cheese. I've also got some cooked turkey that has taco seasoning and some corn in a container that I already had opened. So I add a good amount of the corn and cooked taco meat, and then I just try to tightly seal these calzones. Whenever I make these, no 2 of them actually look the same, but I pretty much just fold over the dough and try to pinch in the corners as tightly as I can. Sometimes I'll even accidentally rip the dough, and then I'll just take some from the side, tear it off, and kind of flatten it down, pretty much just trying to cover all the holes. I pop them in the oven at 400 for about 10 minutes before I check on them, and I decided to make some quick salsa for these to dip them in. This is a recipe in my cookbook, but I just add some chopped onion, cilantro, jalapeños, and then canned tomatoes. I also add a good amount of salt, and then I just blend it up until everything's pretty much chopped and combined. I only had jarred jalapeños on hand, but you could also use fresh ones and make it even more spicy if you want. But once the calzones have been cooking for 10 minutes, I take them out and flip them over, and then usually bake them for about another 10 minutes. And once the top of them is golden, then I pull them out and they're done. This next recipe that I'm making was inspired by one of my favorite flats from Potbelly sandwiches. I decided to make this dough with all whole wheat flour today, so I've got that and the Greek yogurt, and I added just a little bit extra with some garlic parmesan seasoning. I just mix it together with my hands until it forms a dough and then divide it into 2 equal portions, and today I wanted these to be nice and flat. So I do use a little extra flour to roll it out, it just makes it so much easier, and I'm actually just using a fondant roller that I have. But any rolling pin would work, I just like to use this one because it's smaller. So I've got a tray with parchment paper, and once I've got these nice and flat, I lay it out and pop them in the oven for about 10 minutes to par bake. And whenever the dough is par baking, that's when I get all the ingredients prepped. So I've got some garlic hummus here that I'm just mixing up, and I'm also trying to dry off some artichoke hearts and roasted red peppers. Before I started making the dough, I did pop some blackened chicken in the air fryer just to heat it up. It was fully frozen, so it doesn't have to be fully cooked through once I put it in the air fryer because it's going to go back in the oven, but just so that it's no longer frozen. Then I'm using the hummus as a sauce, so it spreads nicely because the flat's already pretty hot. I pulled it out of the oven after about 10 minutes, and I just evenly spread that. Then on top of that, I add the chopped up blackened chicken, roasted red peppers, artichoke hearts, and then I just top it off with some feta cheese. I pop it back in the oven for about 10 to 15 minutes until the bottom of the crust is golden brown, and sometimes I like to dip this in a dressing like ranch or something like that, but I usually just cut it up and turn it into pizza slices. Although I mostly use it for savory foods, 2-ingredient dough works really well for desserts. So today I'm making some cinnamon rolls. They aren't super fluffy like normal cinnamon rolls. If anything, they're a little more dense and chewy, but they're still really good. And like I mentioned before, sometimes I like to use a little bit of milk and a little less of the Greek yogurt. I find it does make it just a little bit more fluffy. But making this dough today, I did add a little bit of cinnamon and vanilla into it to make it a little bit more flavorful. I'm also making the filling using some cinnamon and brown sugar, but you could use a brown sugar replacement. So once the dough is made, I just use a sheet of parchment paper, and sometimes it's easier if you spray it with a little nonstick spray. It makes it even easier to roll the dough out, but I'm using that same fondant roller to get it nice and flat. Then once I've done that, I just sprinkle out the mixture that I made with the brown sugar and cinnamon. Then I start to carefully lift up one edge and just roll it to form it into a log. Originally I was going to make 2 giant cinnamon rolls, but when I rolled out the log, I decided to cut it into 4. Then I just spread them out on a tray lined with parchment paper, and I pop them in the oven at 400 to bake for about 15 to 20 minutes, checking them halfway. I don't know why I made it harder for myself and just put them on the parchment before putting them on the tray. I was making a mess, but anyway, I got those in the oven. And usually with cinnamon rolls, I prefer a cream cheese frosting, but today specifically, I was craving some icing. So all I did to make the icing was mix a little bit of fat-free milk with some powdered sugar, and they do make some powdered sugar replacements that have like artificial sweeteners. Today I was just using regular powdered sugar, but you can use whatever you prefer. But the serving of powdered sugar I used just added a point to the recipe, and I just drizzled it on top each cinnamon roll, and that was it. This next recipe is a taco pizza bake. So this was one of the first times I used whole wheat flour to make 2-ingredient dough, and because of it, it was a little dry. I added some water, but now whenever I make it, I just add a little extra Greek yogurt and it's good. But I just mixed together the Greek yogurt, flour, baking powder, onion salt, salt, and pepper to form a dough. I've got my IKEA baking dishes here that I just sprayed with some nonstick spray, and I divided the dough equally into 2 portions. Then using my hand, I just spread it into the dish until it's covered and pop it in the oven for about 10 minutes at 400 to par bake it. Once it's par baked, I just top it with some queso cheese, and I'm just using my food scale to weigh out the portion. Then I have a can of Rotel that I just strained, and I'm adding that to the top of the pizza. I also cooked up some ground turkey and added taco seasoning to it, so I add a good amount of that to add some protein, and it's 0 points on WeightWatchers. Then to each pizza, I add some reduced fat shredded cheese. This is just like a Mexican cheese blend that I'm using today, and then I top it with some jalapeños. Sometimes I'll also drizzle it with some mild Taco Bell sauce, but I didn't have any, and the tomato makes a good enough sauce with the queso, so I popped that in the oven for another 10 to 15 minutes, and that's it. Okay, the next thing we're making is another thing that I like to make for our appetizer nights. So these ones specifically I'm making in the air fryer, but you can also bake them in the oven. But what I'm making is some cheesy spinach artichoke bites. To make the dough today, I just added some Flavor God garlic lover seasoning and then the regular Greek yogurt, baking powder, and flour. I decided that I wanted 10 bites, so I just weighed out the whole portion, divided it by 10, and then that's what I'm using my food scale to make each portion with. And while I've been making the dough, I've also been cooking up the filling for these bites on the stove. What I did is I just took a big pan and sprayed it with some nonstick olive oil spray. Then I had some frozen artichoke hearts that I just tossed in to start cooking. I also added some salt, pepper, and garlic parmesan seasoning, as well as some minced garlic. And once they were no longer frozen, I added in some handfuls of fresh spinach and let that cook as well. I think it does make it a little bit easier if you let this filling cool for a little bit after you've cooked it, but I was impatient and just started filling the dough, so you can do whatever works best for you, but it may be easier to just set it aside for a second. So you can see I've divided up the dough here, then I've got a sheet with aluminum foil that I spray with some nonstick spray, and I start to flatten out one portion at a time, and I find it easier to just weigh out the cheese and add it to each one as I go, so I do a half serving for a point. And I'm just doing light mozzarella, but even like Laughing Cow or cheddar or any other cheeses would work for this. I just preferred to do mozzarella today, so I placed that onto the dough and then grab a good amount of the artichoke and spinach filling, which is just 0 points on WeightWatchers. And it's kind of like the calzones where they're not going to be perfect, but I just kind of pinch in the ends of the dough and try to seal the holes so that when I put them the other way down, they just bake and they don't pop open. I sprayed them with some nonstick spray, topped them with garlic salt, and then baked them for about 15 to 20 minutes until they were nice and golden. Okay, this next recipe, just doing the voiceover, is making me hungry for it. It's been a while since I've made these Reuben pizza bakes, and they're always one of my favorite meals to have. I start by making a regular batch of 2-ingredient dough using the all-purpose flour and some onion and herb seasoning. Anytime I do the pizza bakes, I use these IKEA dishes that I've mentioned, so I've got those that I spray with some nonstick olive oil spray, and then I divide the dough into 2 equal portions. Then I just press the dough into each dish and pop it in the oven to par bake for about 10 minutes while I prepare the ingredients. And today I'm going to be making the sauce for these, so if I have relish on hand, I use that, but I don't. So I'm just chopping up some pickles and then adding that to some ketchup and light mayonnaise. Then to that, I add some onion salt, minced onion, garlic powder, salt, and pepper. And I just whisk that together to form a sauce that is going to go on my pizza when it comes out of the oven. Most of the time when I do Reuben-inspired recipes, I use this pastrami from Hillshire Farms, and it's just the perfect option that only adds a point for the serving. So I get that nice and chopped up, and then I divide the sauce that I made onto each pizza once it's par baked. I've also got a good amount of sauerkraut that I made sure to really strain using a paper towel so that it doesn't add too much liquid to the pizzas. Then once I've added that, I add the pastrami lunch meat as well as some shredded light mozzarella cheese, and usually I'll use Swiss for any Reuben recipes. I just didn't have any on hand, so mozzarella worked just as well. Then I just pop those back in the oven for another 15 or so minutes to make sure they're fully baked and the crust is golden brown on the bottom. Okay, next up we're making another sweet recipe. This one is inspired by Auntie Anne's cinnamon pretzels. Starting again with a normal batch of 2-ingredient dough using all-purpose flour, Greek yogurt, and baking powder. I forgot to add it here, but a lot of the times I do like to add a little bit of cinnamon to the dough, and I'm going to be using monk fruit sweetener today, so sometimes that's also nice to add into the dough. But I just wanted each bite to be 1 point, so I divide the dough into 16 equal portions, and I just start to roll them out into the shape that I wanted. Instead of little nuggets today, I ended up making like little flattened biscuit type shapes, but you can make them however you'd like to. You could even do bigger pretzels if you'd like. I just prefer to do the bites like this. So the way that you give them a little bit of that bite like pretzels is by boiling them in some water with baking soda. So while I was forming these, I just had some water boiling and added the baking soda. Then I take a spoon and drop each one in, let it sit for about 20 to 30 seconds, and then pop it out. I also wanted to get the cinnamon sugar ready that I'm going to be topping these with. So today I'm using monk fruit sweetener. You can use any sugar substitute or even regular sugar if you'd like. But I just mixed it together with some cinnamon so that it was ready once these were done in the boiling water. I spray them with some nonstick spray and then sprinkle the cinnamon sugar I made, flip them over and do the other side as well. And this is another one that I'm making in the air fryer, but you could also pop these in the oven and bake them the same at 400. But I put them on a foil, pop them in the air fryer, and cook them for about 5 or so minutes till I flip them. I flip them again. And I take them out once they've gotten nice and golden. You can see the cinnamon sugar is melted and they're done throughout. Okay, if you don't like pineapple on your pizza, you might want to skip this one, but this is one of my favorite meals as well. It is a barbecue Canadian bacon pineapple pizza bake. Anytime I share a recipe with Canadian bacon, I get comments about why it's called Canadian bacon, and honestly, I don't even understand it. It pretty much is just ham, but that's what I'm using for this recipe today. I make my normal batch of 2-ingredient dough, divide it into 2, and then put it into these baking dishes with some nonstick olive oil spray. And actually, today I wasn't feeling like par-baking it, I guess, so I just put the dough aside and got the toppings ready, including some fresh pineapple. I've used canned pineapple before, but I always just prefer the fresh, although I do feel like the canned is almost more like when you get it from a restaurant. But then I've got this Canadian bacon that I'm just dicing up. Today I'm using the no sugar added Sweet Baby Ray's barbecue sauce, so I add a good amount of that as the base, top it with the Canadian bacon, pineapple, and light mozzarella cheese, and then I also add just a little bit more of that sauce. I also make sure to always include some type of onion. I feel like it always just goes really well, so this time I'm using red onion, but sometimes I also like to use crispy fried onions. But because I didn't par-bake this one, it does have to bake a little bit longer, so I pop it in the oven at 400 for about 20, 25, 30 minutes, just keeping an eye on it to make sure that the bottom of the crust gets golden. Okay, I know we already did a taco calzone, but I wanted to also include a classic pizza calzone because I like to make these a lot as well. And you can make these in the air fryer or in the oven. Today I'm just popping them in the oven, but I've got my 2-ingredient dough made here. And when I make calzones, I divide them the same way I do pizzas, so I just do half of the batch for each one, making it a 9-point serving. I don't actually put the sauce into the calzone, but I just wanted to make sure it's ready after they're done baking. So I have a can of regular tomato sauce that I just add some seasoning to. Today specifically, I used some garlic salt, Italian seasoning, and then this cheesy seasoning blend that I have. Using my food scale, I just divide those portions, and then I've got a tray that I have a parchment paper on, and I sprayed it with some nonstick olive oil spray. I flattened out the portions of dough so that I can add the toppings, and today I'm using some turkey pepperoni. I also add some light mozzarella cheese. My favorite to use is from Trader Joe's because I find that it just melts the best. Then I also chopped up some green pepper, orange pepper, and onion. And you could see there that a little hole formed in the dough, so I just grabbed a little extra from the corner and kind of pressed it down just to seal that hole. Sometimes it is kind of frustrating working with these calzones, especially if you overstuff them like I did today, but it always does end up working out. Just really do your best to kind of seal these holes like this. And you can see I've got that extra dough that I just flattened out and sealed the hole with. And once I'm pretty much done with that and I've folded the corners up, then I just spray it with some nonstick olive oil spray and top it with a little bit of garlic salt, Italian seasoning, and today I also topped it with a little grated Parmesan. It's one little step to top these, but I really feel like it makes a difference and just adds so much good flavor when you do that. So once I've topped them, I pop them in the oven that's been preheating to 400. I let them bake for about 15 or so minutes, flip them over, and let them bake a little bit longer, mostly just checking that they're golden brown on the bottom. next recipe is such a great breakfast option. So we're making a quiche using a base of 2-ingredient dough. I've got my all-purpose flour, Greek yogurt, baking powder, and some seasonings. For this one today, I'm actually making a smaller batch of the dough, so I used 2/3 cup of all-purpose flour and a 1/2 cup of Greek yogurt. I'm using a 9-inch pie baking dish, and I spray it with a good amount of nonstick olive oil spray. Then I just use the whole serving of dough. I flatten it out to form the crust. I do let it par bake in the oven at 400 for about 10 to 15 minutes while I get the eggs ready. So while that is in the oven, I crack 8 eggs and add a splash of milk. You can use like cashew milk or fat-free milk. I just happen to have cashew on hand. So I whisk that together and then get the veggies ready. This is a recipe where you can really mix it up because you can change whatever vegetables or proteins you add to it. Today I'm using red bell pepper, red onion, and mushrooms. But some other veggies I really like to use are carrots, broccoli, spinach, and sometimes even shredded hash brown potatoes. Once I've got all the veggies chopped, I add them to the egg mixture. Then I've got some garlic and herb seasoning, some pepper. I also add some reduced fat shredded cheese to this. I do really like the flavor of broccoli in my quiche, so I decided to try this riced broccoli as well. Not too much, but just enough to bulk it up a little bit. Then once it's combined, it's usually perfect timing and the dough has par baked, so I pull it out of the oven just to make sure it's good. And then I just pour the egg mixture on top. I pop it back in the oven and bake it pretty much until it's not like jiggly in the middle and the egg is cooked fully through. Usually I get 8 servings out of this. Today I decided to just cut it in quarters, so 1/4 slice was 4 points on WeightWatchers. I like to top it with a good amount of salt and pepper, but that is it. Moving on to this next pizza bake we're making, you can mix up which sauce you use, but specifically I like the La Terrafina Greek yogurt spinach dip for this. We're making a creamy spinach vegetable type pizza bake, and I'm making the 2-ingredient dough using some garlic salt, regular all-purpose flour, baking powder, and Greek yogurt like normal. Specifically for this one with this sauce, I actually like it to be a little bit more on the doughy side, so I don't par bake the dough this time. I just set it aside while I got my vegetables chopped, so I diced up some red onion as well as some roasted red pepper, which I just get it jarred in water like this and I strain it out and chop it. I've also got a big jar of artichoke hearts that come in water, so I try to strain those out just a little and then I chop them up for the pizza bakes. For the protein for these pizzas today, I'm using some chicken sausage, and I'm pretty sure these ones are from Trader Joe's. I also really like the brand Belinsky. They're a good low point chicken sausage option. But there really are a lot of good brands that offer chicken sausages. I also like Amy Lou, and I feel like there's one more. But anyway, I chop those up. I get the baking dishes ready with some nonstick olive oil spray. I flatten out the dough in each dish, and then I use a serving of this dip that I was talking about. So it's a Greek yogurt spinach artichoke dip. It really does add the perfect amount of creaminess, so I spread that out onto each pizza bake, and then I top it with the rest of the vegetables that I chopped up. So that's the roasted red peppers, the red onion, the artichokes, and then of course the chicken sausage. Then I top each pizza with some light mozzarella cheese and a sprinkle of this roasted garlic and Asiago seasoning blend. Again, I didn't par bake these, so I do need to bake them a little bit longer, but I pop them in the oven at 400 for about 25 to 30 minutes, rotating them halfway until they are done. Next up, we're making another breakfast recipe. So this is going to be a breakfast pizza using 2-ingredient dough, and today I'm using a combination of all-purpose flour and whole wheat. I like to do this when I want the crust to be a little bit more on the crunchy side, so I just mix that together with the Greek yogurt and some different seasonings and baking powder until it forms a dough. I know I mention it every time, but if you're using the whole wheat flour, you may need to adjust the amount of yogurt you use, or you could add a splash of milk or water instead, just until it forms a dough. Using my food scale, I weigh out the 2 equal portions, and then I'm using my fondant roller to roll it out nice and flat for a pizza. I par-bake these for just a little bit longer than normal. I usually do about 15 minutes at 400, just because I don't want to over-bake the eggs when I pop them in the oven. They're already going to be cooked. So I get the crusts rolled out and put on a tray with parchment paper to start par-baking, and then I'm just getting my eggs and veggies ready for the pizza. This is another one where you can mix up the vegetables or proteins that you use based on whatever you have on hand. So today I'm using mushrooms and onions, but a lot of times I like to use spinach or bell peppers. I also like to do ham, sausage, bacon, whatever I have on hand, whatever's convenient, or whatever I even have the taste for just works for this. It's just any breakfast option. So I'm chopping up a slice of Crocus ham for each pizza and then a slice of bacon as well. I also get started cooking the eggs, so I'm going to use 2 eggs on each pizza. And actually, before I even started the eggs, the crusts were par-baked, so I just popped those out of the oven and got the eggs cooked quickly. I scramble them together and cook them on the stove until they are just done. I don't want to overdo them because they are going to be going back in the oven, but usually just scramble them up. And then I just divide them up evenly onto each pizza with the toppings that I also divided up. So I add the mushrooms, onions, ham, and bacon, and then I also top it with a little bit of reduced fat cheese. I've also really been enjoying this jalapeno flavored everything bagel seasoning on my breakfast, so I decided to top the pizzas with that, and it added the perfect amount of flavor. So once I've topped them with the cheese and the everything seasoning, I pop them in the oven for about 10 to 15 minutes until the cheese is melted and everything's heated up. Okay, this next pizza bake that we are making is inspired by jalapeno poppers. I did want to add a little extra protein, so I am cooking up some ground chicken to add. But for the crust of the pizza bake today, I am doing half and half all-purpose and whole wheat flour just to make it a little bit lower point. Then I add in the Greek yogurt, baking powder. I added some pepper, garlic parmesan seasoning, and jalapeno popper seasoning that I actually had, and I just mixed that together until it forms a dough. I've got my baking dishes ready and sprayed with some nonstick olive oil spray, and I just divide the dough up and flatten them out into the dishes. I did make a double batch of dough today, so I just weigh out the extra to make into pitas so that I have them ready for the week. A lot of the times it's just easy for me to do that, and since I'm already making the dough, I might as well just make extra. But while I was finishing the dough and getting it in the oven to par bake it for about 10 minutes, I was also cooking up some ground chicken. I cook it fully in a pan on the stove, and then I do like to use this meat masher because I find that making the smaller pieces just makes it that much better. So once it's fully cooked, I use the meat masher. The only veggies I need to chop for it today are jalapenos, so I've got some fresh peppers that I slice up. Once I've broken the meat up into smaller pieces, I add some seasoning to it. So here I've got some onion powder, some jalapeno popper seasoning, and a little more of the garlic parmesan. Once the dough is done par baking, I pull it out of the oven and I spread a light Laughing Cow wedge onto each one. If you let it sit for a second, it does start to melt a little because the dough had been in the oven, so that helps a little bit to spread it out. You can see I was having a little bit of trouble, but I spread out the Laughing Cow. Then on top of that, I add the ground chicken that I cooked up, as well as some bacon. I had some center cut bacon already cooked, so I cut some of that up and added on top, as well as the jalapenos. I top it with a little bit of reduced fat cheddar cheese, and then pop it back in the oven for about 10 to 15 minutes until it's fully melted and done. Okay, I wanted to include a recipe where I already had the 2-ingredient dough pitas done, so these were just prepped in the fridge, and I pull them out and heat them up in the air fryer for a couple minutes. I add some tzatziki. Usually I get it from Aldi, that's my favorite type, but there are a bunch of different options you could use for this, but I spread that on with some roasted red peppers and artichoke hearts. They both come in water, so they're 0 points on Weight Watchers. I just make sure to strain them well before adding them to the pita. My favorite chicken to use for this is blackened chicken, but I didn't have any. This is just a black pepper chicken, so I heated that up in the air fryer. I chop it up and I add it on top with some feta cheese. Then I also just chopped up some cucumbers and added those on top. So you can see I really loaded this thing up, but it's a super filling meal. It's got a good amount of protein, especially with the extra chicken. And all I had to do was heat the chicken in the air fryer and then heat up the pita as well. What's really nice about making chicken pizza bakes is that it's super easy for me to make mine barbecue and Adam's buffalo because he always prefers buffalo, I always prefer barbecue, so that's what I'm making today. Sometimes I'll use pre-cooked chicken for these, like blackened chicken, but if I do have the time and the chicken breast on hand, I'll usually use that and just cook it in a pan on the stove, which is what I'm doing today. So I've got the chicken cooking up while I start making the 2-ingredient dough using 1 1/3 cup all-purpose flour, 1 cup non-fat plain Greek yogurt, 1 teaspoon of baking powder, as well as a little bit of seasoning. And I also add that same seasoning, it's just garlic and herb, to the chicken once it's fully cooked. It's so much easier to just use my kitchen scissors to chop it into smaller pieces. So that's what I'm doing here. Then I've got the 2-ingredient dough made, so I just divide it up evenly into 2 portions, spray the pan with some nonstick spray, and then press it out like normal for pizza bakes. I'm not par-baking the dough today. Again, it's just a choice if you want to do it or not. Today, I guess I didn't feel like doing it, so I just put the sauce directly onto the dough. I've got Adam's buffalo and my no sugar added barbecue. I just used a pastry brush to spread it out evenly, and then I'm adding some chopped up red onion as well as the chicken that I cooked up. I also add some light mozzarella cheese, and then I have some crispy fried jalapeños that are a little bit spicy, but they really add such good flavor, and they work well on both the buffalo and the barbecue pizzas. Once I have all the toppings on each pizza bake, I pop them in the oven at 400 for about 25 to 30 minutes until they're golden brown and the cheese is melted. And another topping that works really well on both of them is ranch dressing. So I put a drizzle of some Bolt House ranch onto each of them, and that is it. This next one's super quick, but it's one of my favorites, and I wanted to include it because we like to make it for appetizer night. It is meant to be like a copycat Auntie Anne's pretzel bite. One thing that really adds to the buttery flavor of these is when I'm making the dough using the all-purpose flour, Greek yogurt, and baking powder, I also add some movie theater butter salt in. It just adds to the buttery flavor and makes them a little bit more salty, and all I do is I form them into little nuggets like this. These actually turned out to be more like pretzel balls, but anything works. I boil them in the water and baking soda mix for about 30 seconds, then I pop them out and top them with some egg wash. If I've got extra points to use, I'll top them with melted butter, but today I did the egg wash and some pretzel salt, and that was it. Okay, I figured I should also include a classic 2-ingredient dough pizza in this because this is another one that I just make all the time. I'm making the regular 2-ingredient dough with some onion salt and roasted garlic and herb seasoning. This is one of the only times you'll see me not using Chobani Greek yogurt, but I just had the Trader Joe's one because that's what we had on hand. So I still used the normal amount and it still worked out. I mix it together to form the dough. I divide it into 2 equal portions, spray some parchment with some olive oil spray, and then just roll the dough out to form a flat pizza crust. And I did make extra dough again today so that I could make pitas, but while I popped that in the oven to par bake, I wanted to get the sauce ready for the pizza, and I wanted to use some fresh basil from the garden. So I grabbed some of that and chop it up to mix in with a can of tomato sauce from Trader Joe's. I've also got some minced garlic, some garlic and onion seasoning, and then a little salt and pepper, and I just mix that together until it's combined, and then I top it on the pizza once it has par baked for 10 minutes. For my toppings on this pizza today, I chopped up some mushrooms, some red onion. I'm also using turkey pepperoni. I also had some turkey sausage crumbles, so I added those on with some light mozzarella cheese from Trader Joe's. And then I popped this back in the oven for another 15 to 20 minutes until it was fully baked. This next recipe is another one where I'm just using a pita that I had made previously. I didn't heat up the pita ahead of time because I'm going to be popping this entire thing into the air fryer, but I topped it with some bean dip from Taco Bell, some ground turkey taco meat, and light shredded cheese. And then I just popped it in the air fryer until it was melted. This next one's similar to the bagel dog bites, but I'm just making an entire sausage covered in 2-ingredient dough. I'm doing my normal batch with all-purpose flour, Greek yogurt, and baking powder, and then I've got these turkey sausages from Aldi as well as some turkey dogs. I divided the dough out into equal portions, and I'm just doing my best to make sure there are no holes in the entire bagel dog. But I just wrap the dough tightly around each one, then I spray them with some non-stick olive oil spray and top them with a little bit of garlic salt. I pop them in the oven at 400 for about 20 to 25 minutes, and I just flip them over halfway. And once they're done, they are delicious, dipped in some ketchup and mustard, and that's it. This next recipe I like to use as a side when I make pasta. I had some chives in my garden that I really needed to use up, and I was craving some cheddar chive biscuits, so I made the 2-ingredient dough, added some garlic powder, roasted garlic and herb seasoning, garlic salt, and then I chopped up some chives and mixed it all together. I also added just 1 slice of thin sliced cheddar, and it was the perfect amount. When I'm mixing ingredients in or cheeses in like this, I kind of prefer to use full fat cheese because I just find it melts better and combines better than reduced fat cheeses. But I just weighed them out into equal portions and put them on a tray with parchment and some nonstick spray. I sprayed each biscuit with a little bit of nonstick. I was trying to decide if I wanted them to be like perfectly shaped or more like drop biscuits, and I decided to kind of spread them out like drop biscuits. But I just topped them with a little garlic salt and popped them in the oven until they were fully browned. Okay, this last recipe I'm making is of course one of Adam's favorites. It is buffalo chicken bites, and I'm making them a little bit bigger this time, but I made a batch of 2-ingredient dough and I divided it evenly. I had some garlic and herb chicken breast that I had grilled up earlier in the week, so I just used my hands to shred it. It's much easier to use forks or put it in a KitchenAid mixer to shred it, but I just wanted to do this quickly, and it didn't need to be that small of chunks for this. So once I shredded the chicken, I added some buffalo sauce and light mozzarella cheese. I flatten out each portion of dough, and then I divide up the chicken mixture. I knew I probably made too much, but I wanted to make sure to use it up, so I just really stuffed each bite. And just like before, I pretty much just pinch in the corners and roll it with my hand so that it's fully sealed. I always place it with the seal down. I feel like that just helps, so if it does start to open while it's baking, it's just not as messy. But I spray them with some nonstick olive oil spray, top them with some garlic salt, and pop them in the oven at 400 until they're fully baked. Okay, so that wraps up my 2-ingredient dough recipes for this video. I hope you guys found it helpful and got some inspiration, and maybe try out 2-ingredient dough if you haven't before. I'm sure you're sick of seeing it being made because I just showed it in every recipe, but hopefully it's helpful to see that it really comes together quick and easy with some flour and some Greek yogurt, and you can do so many different things with it. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video and found it helpful. If you did, please go ahead and give it a like and subscribe to my channel. I really appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.